Once you've collected sources, then you need to report on them in your final essay. And in this lecture, we're going to explore the principles of integrity. We're going to look at plagiarism and its causes, academic dialogue, and the concept of scholarly integrity. These materials are based on Graf and Birkenstein, chapters 2 and 3, and Fagley, chapters 21 and 24. Okay, referring to sources. This is a necessity in college writing, and doing it properly is a crucial skill. It's one fraught with challenges and dangers. So I would suggest that at this point you slow down. Really pay attention to these first two lectures for the week. Success in your academic career is at stake. Let's begin with the bad news. Some phrases that causes a lot of anxiety for many college students. Things like quotation formats. How do I properly format my quotations? How do I paraphrase effectively? What is this thing that everybody talks about, APA documentation? And what about this horrible word, plagiarism? What is plagiarism? Well, Fagley discusses it in section 21H. He defines it as claiming credit for someone else's intellectual work. This happens in the professional and commercial worlds. It also happens in politics when people plagiarize speeches. And it happens in schools when learners cheat in order to get grades. The consequences can be severe. Learners can fail a class or be expelled, and politicians and artists have had their careers ruined. Now let's consider an all too common scenario. An instructor asks an exercise question based on course readings. Please define corporal punishment. A learner gives this answer. Corporal punishment is physical punishment as a deliberate infliction of pain, and so forth. Note, there is no introduction to another source, and there are no quotation marks here. The instructor sees this passage and has an immediate impression. This seems like pretty sophisticated professional language. I wonder. And sure enough, after a 90-second Google search, the instructor finds this Wikipedia article. And if you compare the language in the two, it is quite clear. This is plagiarism, use of material from another source with no indication of having borrowed it. Okay, that sounds pretty bad, right? But let's take a step back for a moment. What really happened? Can we assume that this learner is dishonest and lazy? Well, maybe not. Some learners intentionally cheat to avoid work, but most cases of plagiarism arise from confusion or from clashing models of learning and communication. The whole idea of plagiarism arises from a model of academic study that is common in Western Europe and the United States. Fagley says that knowledge is built through ongoing conversations that take place in writing. This is what Graf and Birkenstein refer to all the time as a dialogue. When an instructor makes a judgment about writing, that instructor draws on core values: the individual voice arguing a position, critical dialogue with academic literature, a reliance on a track of information sources that one can follow. Where and how can I follow up on that source? And Western ideas of property rights. This is the authoritative perspective by which your writing in Western colleges will be judged. You need to understand that as a college student, you're expected to play a part within that Western academic community. You're responsible to its values: a review of the literature, critical dialogue, presenting your argument, and properly citing sources. And This can mean an array of challenges. What, after all, does it mean to learn? Well, for many people, learning means taking in material that one didn't have before, and then displaying the fact that one took it in, passively and often in the original language. This can lead to a passive view of school writing. What am I trying to do in a college essay? Well, I'm reproducing the answers that I've received, often word by word. Yes, I used the words of the source. That's the answer, right? Why would I say anything else? Now, we must acknowledge that in many of the world cultures, academic inquiry is done quite differently. There's a stronger deference to authority, for example, the authority of the written text. There's a submergence of the personal voice. The value of memorizing classic text that everyone would know without markers is much stronger. And one honors readers in some of these cultures by letting them see implied ideas and references without insulting them by pointing them out. This can lead to students who find it very painful and difficult to adapt to Western academic expectations. We also might refer to the web trap. Fagley says that some students view the internet as a big free buffet where they can grab anything, paste it in a file, and submit it as their work. There's a sort of myth of a free lunch on the internet. There's all this convenient and free music, videos, and information, all available, free downloads, right? The problem with the web myth is that web content needs to be critically evaluated. Your instructors expect you to contribute to the conversation, and as an academic, your readers want to be able to track your sources. You'll do well to adopt Graff and Birkenstein's dynamic view of writing. Writing, in their eyes, is active, not passive. It's a conversation between writer and sources, a critical dialogue, a debate with argument and agreement and disagreement. And it's situated in the writer, that is to say, your purpose and argument. If you just passively incorporate text from somewhere else, well, this is inadequate to the task of critical dialogue. It's not what your instructors are looking for, even apart from the ethical issues. Now, in a dialogue, one always needs balance, and this is a theme that crops up again and again for Graff and Birkenstein. To argue persuasively, you need to be in dialogue, which is two or more voices interacting and debating. For example, Graff and Birkenstein introduce two mistakes that are often made about summary: shying away from referring to what other sources say, and channeling sources without offering any contribution. They similarly distinguish between people who quote too little and people who overquote. Imagine you're flying on an airplane. Which wing is more important than the other? Well, that's a silly question, right? You need both wings to avoid crashing. Well, when you're writing, you need two wings. First, you need to be able to refer to sources and conduct a critical dialogue with what they say, and to find evidence for the points you want to make. The other wing is reflection in your own voice, the claims that you want to make, what you say, and an argument for those claims, and a context that makes sense of the references to other sources. To write well, you need a balance between the two wings. Too much or too little of either, your writing plane will crash. Let's look at an example in Graff and Birkenstein. They talk about hit and run quotations. Okay, you are supposed to quote other sources in your writing, but what is a hit and run quotation or dangling quotation? This is where the quotation is just sitting there. There's no introduction, there's no framework, there's no commentary by the writer. So the reader doesn't know how to take the material. There's an example of this on page 45. There's a long quotation and it's left to speak for itself. We don't know what Bordeaux thinks about this quotation. Here we have wing 1, but there's no wing 2. Okay, I see the quoted text. What do you want me to do with it? Another example is what Graf and Birkenstein refer to as list summaries. This is a text that consists of a long list of points made by some source. Yang says X, and then he says Y, and then he says Z, and then he points out one reference after another to what Yang says, and there's no critical interaction, no contribution to the dialogue, no indication of why these points are even cropping up at this particular time. Very frequently, college writers make a fundamental mistake. They compile source material, but then they put it into their writing arbitrarily. There's no commentary, there's no interpretation, no evaluation. Source references are left to speak for themselves. And whether or not the material is properly cited, this shows why plagiarism doesn't work. It doesn't show what you know or understand. It doesn't reflect your critical thinking, and it doesn't meet the expectations of your college instructors. When we talk about academic integrity, avoiding plagiarism, this is a matter of honesty, but it's also a matter of dynamic learning and critical dialogue with sources. There are two wings of the airplane. In our next lecture, we'll talk about how we actually do it.